My name is Eleanor Morrison. I'm 64 years old, and I discovered my daughter-in-law was not only sleeping with my husband of 42 years, but was also plotting to take every penny of my family's inheritance. Before I tell you all about how my grandfather's foresight and a brilliant lawyer left them with nothing but the clothes on their backs, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The clinking of champagne glasses sounded like tiny, brittle bells in the warm evening air. It was our 42nd wedding anniversary, and the garden of our home, the home my grandfather built and I had painstakingly restored, was filled with the soft murmur of friends and family. From the outside, it was a perfect picture, the sort of thing you'd see in a magazine. Walter, my husband, stood by the old oak tree, looking distinguished in his gray suit, laughing with some of his colleagues from the firm. And then there was Amber, my daughter-in-law. She was a whirlwind of practiced charm, moving through the party with a plate of canapés, her smile bright, and her blonde hair catching the golden light of the setting sun. She'd been married to our son, Nathan, for 3 years, and in that time, she had woven herself so deeply into the fabric of our lives that it was hard to remember a time before her. "Eleanor, you haven't eaten the thing," she said, her voice a sweet melody as she appeared at my elbow. "You can't host a party on an empty stomach." She placed a cracker piled high with smoked salmon into my hand. "Thank you, dear. You've outdone yourself," I said, and I meant it. The party was flawless. She squeezed my arm, a gesture of affection she performed often, but as she turned to offer a canapé to Walter, who had just walked over, I saw it. A look. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but it wasn't the look a daughter-in-law gives her father-in-law. It was possessive, intimate. It was a silent question and a silent answer, a spark of shared secrecy that passed between them in less than a second. My stomach tightened. I told myself I was being foolish, a tired old woman seeing ghosts where there were none. The party wound down, and soon only a few people remained. Sage, Amber's older sister, was helping me clear glasses from the patio table. Sage was different from Amber, quieter, more observant, with a kindness in her eyes that always seemed a little sad. "It was a beautiful party, Eleanor," she said, her voice low. "You and Walter, 42 years. That's something special." "It's been a life," I agreed, forcing a smile. "A lot of work, but a good life." She hesitated, her hands stilling over a stack of plates. "Can I ask you something? And please, don't be angry." I put down the napkins I was holding. "Of course, Sage. What is it?" She wouldn't meet my eyes. She stared at the dark wood of the table, tracing the grain with her finger. "Have you noticed anything different about Amber?" The tightness in my stomach returned, cold and sharp. "Different how?" A tear slipped down her cheek, and she wiped it away angrily. "I shouldn't be here. This isn't my place, but I can't watch it happen again." "Happen again?" My voice was a whisper. "Our parents," she said, her voice cracking. "They had a small business, a hardware store. Amber, she got involved. She charmed our father, convinced him to make her a partner, to take out loans for a big expansion he didn't need. Within 2 years, they were bankrupt. They lost everything. He trusted her completely. She has a way of finding a person's weakness and making it her strength." My breath caught in my throat. I thought of Walter's recent complaints about feeling old, about his career stalling, about how Amber was always there to tell him how brilliant he was, how underappreciated. "Sage, what did you see?" I asked, my voice flat. She took a shaky breath. "I saw them last week, at a cafe downtown, near Walter's office. They thought no one would see them there. They were holding hands across the table, Eleanor. He was looking at her like he used to look at you in the old pictures. And I heard her laugh and say something about how you both were finally going to get the life you deserved." The world tilted on its axis. The cheerful sounds of the party, the scent of roses from my garden, the warmth of the evening, it all vanished. I was in a cold, silent vacuum. 42 years, Raising Nathan, building this home, supporting Walter's career, managing the family inheritance so he wouldn't have to worry, it all fractured in an instant. I wasn't just hurt, I felt erased. I felt like a fool, a dotty old woman who had been so busy tending her garden that she hadn't noticed the snakes nesting at her feet. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face now. "I know she's my sister, but what she's doing is wrong. What she did to our parents was wrong." I reached out and placed my hand over hers. My own hand was perfectly steady. I felt no urge to cry. The shock was so profound that it had burned away the tears, leaving behind something hard and crystalline. "You have nothing to be sorry for," I said, and my voice was unnervingly calm. "You did the right thing. Thank you." I didn't just feel betrayed, I felt a cold, clear purpose settle over me. This wasn't just about an affair. Sage's story about her parents, it was a warning. Amber wasn't just after my husband, she was after my life, my home, my son's legacy, and I would not let her have it. The next morning, the house felt cavernous and silent. Walter had left early for the office, giving me a perfunctory kiss on the cheek that felt like the brush of a stranger's hand. I stood in the kitchen, the beautiful, sunlit room that had been the heart of our family, and felt like a ghost in my own home. But I didn't allow myself to drift. I had work to do. I didn't call a divorce lawyer. Not yet. I called a number I hadn't dialed in years, a recommendation from an old friend. The brass plaque on the mahogany door read, "Patricia Chan, ESQ, Estate and Trust Law." Patricia's office was on the 30th floor of a downtown skyscraper with a panoramic view of the city. It was a place of quiet, understated power. Patricia herself was a woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She didn't offer platitudes or tissues. She offered a cup of black coffee and listened. I didn't cry. I laid out the facts as Sage had given them to me, my voice even and measured. I told her about Amber's history with her parents' business. I told her about the look I'd seen passed between my husband and my daughter-in-law. "This is more than a simple case of infidelity, Mrs. Morrison," Patricia said when I finished. "This sounds like a calculated financial maneuver. Amber isn't the goal. She's the vehicle. Your husband's midlife crisis is the engine, and your assets are the destination."
"I know," I said. "That's why I'm here. I'm not looking for a divorce settlement. I'm looking for a war plan. I want to know about the trust. My grandfather established it. Walter has always been a beneficiary, but I've always been the primary trustee. He never cared for the details." Patricia nodded, pulling a file from a cabinet. "I took the liberty of looking up the public records on the Morrison Family Trust after you called. Your grandfather was a very wise and very specific man." She spent the next hour walking me through the dense legal language. My grandfather, a man who had built his fortune from nothing, was deeply protective of his legacy. He knew that fortunes could be lost not just through bad investments, but through bad marriages. I held my breath, waiting for her to point out some obscure clause, some pre-written trap that would solve all my problems. But that's not what she showed me. "There is no infidelity clause, Eleanor," Patricia said, her eyes meeting mine. "There is something much more powerful." She turned the document towards me and pointed to a paragraph. "Your grandfather named you as the primary trustee upon his passing, but he also included this. The primary trustee holds the sole and absolute authority to amend, alter, or restate the terms of this trust, including the designation and removal of any beneficiary, for the express purpose of protecting the integrity and preserving the legacy of the family estate against external threats or internal malfeasance." I read the words twice. My heart began to beat a slow, heavy drum. "What does it mean exactly?" I asked. "It means your grandfather didn't build you a cage to trap a cheating spouse, Eleanor. He gave you a sword and a shield. It means that you, and you alone, have the power to rewrite the rules. Walter knows he's a beneficiary of the trust. He probably assumes it's a standard arrangement, that he's entitled to half of everything. What he doesn't know is that his status as a beneficiary is entirely at your discretion. If you have just cause to believe he is acting against the interests of the family legacy, say by conspiring with a predatory daughter-in-law to liquidate its assets for personal gain, you have the legal authority to remove him. A dizzying sense of power washed over me, so potent it almost made me sick. This wasn't luck. This was responsibility. My grandfather hadn't left me a trick. He had left me a test of my strength, my resolve. "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "We do nothing for now," Patricia said, a flicker of a smile on her lips. "We let them get comfortable. We let them believe you are a weak, broken old woman ready to be put out to pasture. They will get greedy. They will make mistakes. And you will be watching. While they're planning a hostile takeover, we will be drafting an amendment to this trust, a family loyalty addendum. It will state in ironclad terms that any beneficiary found to be acting in concert to defraud the estate or its primary trustee will be permanently and irrevocably disinherited. We will get it drafted, notarized, and filed with the court. Quietly. They won't know it exists until it's too late." I walked out of that office feeling like a different woman. The grief was still there, a cold stone in my chest, but it was now surrounded by a wall of ice. They thought they were dealing with a fragile old relic. They were about to find out they were dealing with her grandfather's daughter. The plan was terrifying. It was audacious, and it was mine. The days that followed were a masterclass in deception. I became the woman they expected me to be. Broken, withdrawn, and confused. I let the garden go just a little. The roses I usually tended with such care began to look a bit wild, their petals browning at the edges, a perfect mirror for how I was supposed to be feeling. During our strained family dinners, I would push food around my plate, sighing quietly. Amber would lay a hand on my arm, her face a mask of concern. "Eleanor, are you all right? You seem so distant lately," she'd say, her voice dripping with false sympathy, while her eyes darted to Walter for a fraction of a second. "Just tired, dear," I would murmur. "Getting old, I suppose." Walter would pat my hand awkwardly, but there was relief in his eyes. My sadness was making things easier for him. It was absolving him of his guilt. Behind this facade, I was a woman at war. Every night after Walter fell asleep, he had moved into the guest room, claiming he was snoring too much. I would go to my study. I had a new journal, a simple, leather-bound book. In it, I documented everything. October 12th. W. Home late. Said it was a client dinner. Found a receipt from the Gilded Lily in his pocket. A cocktail bar. 2 drinks. He doesn't drink cocktails. October 15th. A mentioned how much work the house is. Such a big place for just 2 people. The upkeep must be a fortune. She was testing the waters. October 19th. Spoke to my friend Victoria today. I told her I was thinking of selling my grandmother's diamond brooch, that I needed the money for some unexpected expenses. A complete lie, of course. The brooch is in a safe deposit box. I am waiting to see if this information finds its way back to Amber. And it did. A week later, during another stilted conversation, Amber casually mentioned a friend of hers who was a jewelry appraiser. "You know, Eleanor, if you ever have any old pieces you're not wearing, he gives fantastic rates. So many people have hidden treasures and don't even know it." The confirmation sent a chill down my spine.
Victoria, my friend of 30 years, the woman who had held my hand at my mother's funeral, was feeding them information. It was a shallow cut compared to the gaping wound of Walter's betrayal, but it stung nonetheless. It hardened my resolve. I was truly alone in this, except for Nathan, and he didn't know the full extent of my plan yet. I had to be smarter, more careful. My greatest performance came during a weekend visit from Nathan. He could tell something was wrong. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, his brow furrowed with worry as we sat on the porch. "You're not yourself, and Dad is weird." I looked at my son, my wonderful, earnest son, who still believed in the goodness of his family. I couldn't tell him the truth. Not yet. It would break his heart, and I needed him clear-headed. So I gave him a version of the truth. "Your father and I are having a difficult time, sweetheart. After so many years, sometimes people just grow apart." Tears welled in my eyes, and for the first time, they were real. The grief for the marriage I thought I had, for the family I thought we were, washed over me. I let him see it. I let him see me as a fragile mother in need of protection. "Oh, Mom," he said, pulling me into a hug. "I'm so sorry." Amber and Walter were watching us from the kitchen window. I could feel their eyes on my back. I knew what they were thinking. They were seeing a son comforting a heartbroken mother, a son who would surely understand when the time came for her to be gently moved aside for the sake of her father's happiness. They had no idea they were looking at their own downfall. They saw a grieving wife and a loyal son. They didn't see a queen and her prince gathering their forces in plain sight. Every sigh, every tear, every forgotten appointment was a carefully placed stone in the wall of their prison. I was building it brick by brick, right in front of their eyes, and they were too busy congratulating themselves to notice. The other shoe dropped on a gray Tuesday in November. I was in the kitchen, pretending to read a cookbook, when Walter came in. He stood awkwardly by the counter, unable to meet my eyes. He was holding a cup of coffee, but his hands were trembling slightly. "Eleanor, we need to talk," he said, his voice husky. I looked up from my book, my face a carefully constructed mask of mild inquiry. "What is it, Walter?" He cleared his throat. This isn't working anymore, is it? We're like two strangers living in the same house. We haven't been happy for years." "We haven't been happy?" The audacity of it almost made me laugh. "I was happy before you started sleeping with our son's wife, you fool." "I suppose not," I said softly, closing the book. "I think," he took a deep breath, "I think it's time we considered a divorce." There it was. The words hung in the air between us, ugly and final. I had been waiting for them, preparing for them, but they still landed like a punch to the gut. This was the point of no return. I summoned a tear. I let it trace a path down my cheek. A divorce? After 42 years? His face softened with a mixture of pity and relief. This was the reaction he had expected, the one Amber had likely coached him on how to handle. "It's for the best, Eleanor, for both of us. We can finally be free to find our own happiness." He launched into a speech that was clearly rehearsed, talking about new chapters and amicable endings. At the end, he presented his offer. "I don't want to fight," he said, his tone magnanimous. "I've spoken to a lawyer just to see what's fair. I'll keep the house, of course, and the business assets. It's too complicated to divide. But you can have the condo downtown. It's a lovely place. And I'll set you up with a generous alimony, enough for you to live comfortably. No more worries." No more worries. He was offering me a pittance, a gilded cage, in exchange for my entire life's work. He and Amber had clearly decided my connection to the family home and the bulk of the inheritance was purely sentimental, something I could be bought out of with a comfortable condo and a monthly check. I let the silence stretch. I dabbed at my eyes with a napkin. I don't know what to say, Walter. I need to think. Of course, he said quickly, patting my shoulder. Take all the time you need. The next day, I called him. All right, Walter, I said, my voice thick with false resignation. If this is what you really want, I won't fight you. I could hear the relief in his sigh, so profound it was almost a gasp. Thank you, Eleanor. You're being very reasonable. Reasonable. That was me. I immediately called Patricia Chen. He's made his move, I said. Excellent, she replied, her voice crisp. I've already drafted the addendum. I'll have it couriered to you. We need to get it signed, notarized, and filed before you even step into a room with his lawyer. The timing must be perfect. 2 days later, a slim package arrived. I sat in my study, the door locked, and read the document. It was called The Morrison Family Legacy Preservation Addendum. It was 2 pages of dense, beautiful, ruthless legalese. It outlined the fiduciary duty of all beneficiaries to act in the best interests of the trust. And then came the critical line. Any beneficiary found to have engaged in actions constituting malfeasance, including but not limited to conspiracy to defraud the estate or adultery that brings disrepute upon the family, shall have their status as a beneficiary immediately and permanently revoked. My hand was shaking as I signed my name at the bottom. Eleanor Grace Morrison, Primary Trustee. I met a mobile notary Patricia had arranged at a coffee shop miles from my home. We signed and stamped the papers. Patricia filed it with the probate court the very next morning. It was done. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was walk into it. Nathan was my weak spot. Every time I saw the worried look on his face, the way he tried to bridge the growing chasm between his father and me, a part of my resolve wavered. He was a good man, a good son, and he was being played for a fool by the 2 people he should have been able to trust the most. His awakening didn't come from a dramatic discovery of text messages. Amber was far too clever for that. She was a digital ghost, using burner apps and deleting everything. His awakening was slower, more painful, a dawning horror born of numbers on a spreadsheet. Nathan, an accountant by trade, had always helped me with my personal finances. It was a routine we'd had since he finished college. After Walter proposed the divorce, I asked him to come over and help me figure things out. Mom, I don't feel right about this, he said, sitting at the kitchen table, a laptop open in front of him. Looking at Dad's finances behind his back? I'm not asking you to look at his finances, sweetheart. I'm asking you to look at mine. And at Amber's. She's on our family phone plan. She has a credit card linked to your account for household expenses. I just want to make sure everything is in order before things get complicated. He sighed, but he couldn't refuse. He loved his spreadsheets, his neat columns of figures that told a story. For the first hour, everything seemed normal. Then he paused. That's weird, he muttered. What is it? Amber's credit card. There are a lot of charges. Restaurants downtown, near Dad's office, places you and I have never been. And hotels. The Langley, the St. Regis. They're listed as business travel for her marketing job, but her company is based out in the suburbs. Why would she be staying in a $500 a night hotel downtown? I stayed silent, letting the numbers speak for themselves. I watched my son's face as he clicked through months of statements. I saw the gears turning, the denial fighting a losing battle against the cold, hard data. He pulled up the phone records. He couldn't see the content of the messages, but he could see the pattern. Hundreds of texts between Amber and Walter, often late at night, often when they were supposedly in different places. The final nail in the coffin wasn't a hotel bill or a phone log. It was a file he found buried in a cloud storage account linked to the credit card. It was labeled Financial Projections. He clicked it open.
It was a detailed spreadsheet. On one side, it listed Walter's assets, his salary, his 401k, and a section titled Projected Inheritance Trust Payout. On the other side was a list of expenses: new car, Mercedes, European vacation, first class, down payment, summer home. At the very bottom was a note: initial alimony payments to E to be phased out after 24 months, pending review. Nathan stared at the screen, his face pale. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a horrified understanding. "Mom?" he whispered. "What is this?" I didn't have to answer. He knew. He pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He looked like he was going to be sick. He was out the door before I could stop him. I knew where he was going. He and Amber lived only 10 minutes away. 2 hours later, he returned. He was hollowed out, the life drained from his eyes. He collapsed into a chair at the kitchen table and buried his face in his hands. "She admitted it," he said, his voice muffled. "She didn't even try to deny it. She laughed. She said she never loved me. She said Dad could give her a life I never could, that I didn't have his ambition. She looked up at me, her face a mask of agony. She said he was working on getting a promotion and that his new salary would be more than enough for them. She was talking about his money like it was already hers." I went to him and wrapped my arms around his shaking shoulders. "I'm so sorry, Nathan. I'm so, so sorry." He leaned into me, a little boy again. "I was so stupid. How could I not see it?" "You're not stupid," I said, my voice fierce. "You're a good man. You see the good in people because you are good. That is a strength, not a weakness. They used it against you." He pulled back, wiping his eyes. A new light was dawning in them, replacing the pain with a cold, hard anger. "What are we going to do?" I looked at my son, my ally, my prince. It was time. I said, "We are not going to do anything. We are going to let them think they've won. And then I am going to take back everything they think they've stolen." I told him about my grandfather's trust. I told him about Patricia Chen. I told him about the addendum. I watched his shock turn into a slow, grim smile. The game had changed. Now, there were two of us playing. With Nathan on my side, our investigation took on a new, sharper focus. He was methodical, relentless, and fueled by the righteous fury of a man betrayed. Sage became our quiet accomplice, a source of information from inside the enemy's family. It was during a hushed phone call with Sage that we got the piece of the puzzle that turned our domestic tragedy into something far more sinister. I don't know if this means anything, but before my Aunt Eleanor, yes, she had the same name as you, a strange coincidence, before she died, Amber kept talking about this financial advisor, a man named Vincent Gallo. She said he was a miracle worker, that he helped Aunt Eleanor get her affairs in order. My aunt was so frail at the end, she would have signed anything Amber put in front of her. The name meant nothing to me, but to Nathan, it was a key. He spent a whole weekend in his home office, the blinds drawn, digging into this Vincent Gallo. What he found was chilling. Gallo wasn't a miracle worker. He was a shark who specialized in high-risk insurance policies and offshore accounts, with a string of complaints against him that always seemed to get settled out of court. "Mom, I need you to prepare yourself," he said, his face grim. He showed me what he had found. Using Gallo's name as a starting point, he had uncovered the existence of a massive life insurance policy. It had been taken out on Walter 6 months ago. The premiums were being paid out of a shell corporation, but the trail led back to an account funded
by Amber. The beneficiary wasn't a person. It was another corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, a corporation wholly owned by Amber. She was planning to bleed him dry in the divorce. But this is a contingency plan. If he died, she would get everything. $10 million. The room felt cold. The air thin. This went beyond greed. This was a level of cold-blooded calculation but was terrifying. Amber wasn't just a homewrecker. She was a predator. I sat down, my legs suddenly weak. What do we do with this, Nathan? We give it to Patricia, he said immediately. This is evidence of financial malfeasance on a massive scale. It solidifies our case for the trust. But Sage had one more piece of information. When we told her about the insurance policy, she went silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was trembling. My Aunt Eleanor, she said. Her death was so sudden. The doctor said it was a heart attack. She was old, she was sick, it made sense. But she had an insurance policy too, a much smaller one, but still. Amber was the sole beneficiary. The money paid for the funeral, and Amber used the rest to put a down payment on the house she shares with Nathan. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken horror. We were all thinking the same thing. Could she? Would she? Her funeral was a closed casket, Sage whispered. Amber insisted on it. She said it was more dignified. My mind reeled. We were out of our depth. This wasn't about a divorce anymore. The money, the house, the inheritance, it all seemed secondary now. This was about a woman who left a trail of financial and possibly physical destruction in her wake. We have to go to the police, I said, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. No, Nathan said, his voice firm. Not yet. Mom, think. If we go to the police now, it becomes a criminal investigation. Everything freezes, the divorce, the trust, it all gets tangled up in a legal mess that could take years. They will know we're onto them. Right now, they think they're in control. They're walking into our trap. We have to let them. He was right. It was a terrible, pragmatic truth. We had to let the civil matter play out first. We had to secure the family legacy, protect our assets, and finalize the divorce. We had to win our war before we could let the justice system fight its own. So we hold on to this? I asked, looking at the damning papers on the screen. We say nothing? We hold on to it, Nathan confirmed. This is our ace in the hole. After you've secured the trust and the divorce is final, after they have no legal claim to anything, we hand this entire file to the district attorney. We let them walk out of the civil court as paupers, only to walk into a criminal court as defendants.
The plan was ruthless. It was cold. And it was absolutely necessary. It felt like holding a live grenade. The weight of what we knew was immense. A dark secret that sat with us through the next few weeks as we prepared for the final act of our charade. We weren't just fighting for a house anymore. We were fighting to make sure Amber never had the chance to hurt anyone ever again. The day we were scheduled to sign the divorce papers was overcast and cold. The sky the color of slate. It felt fitting. We met at the offices of Walter's lawyer, a slick man named Richard Peaton, who had a corner office that reeked of expensive cigars and self-satisfaction. Walter and Amber arrived together. They were a portrait of smug victory. Walter wore a new suit, a shade too tight, and Amber was dressed in a chic, cream-colored dress, looking more like a blushing bride than a departing daughter-in-law. She avoided looking at me, instead focusing on Walter, occasionally touching his arm in a gesture of supportive ownership. I, on the other hand, had dressed the part of the vanquished wife. I wore a simple gray dress, no makeup, and my hair pulled back in a severe bun. I looked tired. I looked defeated.
Nathan sat beside me, his face a stony mask of neutrality. Patricia Chen, my lawyer, sat on my other side, her briefcase resting on her lap, her expression calm and unreadable. Richard Peaton started the meeting with a series of condescending pleasantries. "Well, let's get this over with as painlessly as possible," he said, smiling thinly. "I'm glad we could all come to such a reasonable and amicable agreement." He slid the settlement across the polished mahogany table. I didn't need to read it. I knew what it said. It was my surrender. It gave me the downtown condo, a monthly alimony check that was an insult disguised as generosity, and it signed away my rights to the home I had lived in for over 40 decades, the business I had helped build, and the legacy my grandfather had entrusted to me. "Eleanor, if you'll just sign here and here," Richard said, pointing with a gold pen. Walter watched me, a flicker of something, guilt, impatience, in his eyes. Amber was practically vibrating with anticipation. This was it, the culmination of all her plans, the moment the old queen was officially dethroned. I took a deep, shaky breath, a performance for their benefit. I picked up the pen. Nathan's hand rested on my arm for a second, a silent message of support. I looked at the signature line, Eleanor G. Morrison. For 42 years, that name had been linked to Walter's. This signature would sever it. My pen scratched across the paper. I signed every page, my movements slow and deliberate. When I was done, I pushed the papers back across the table. "There," I said, my voice quiet. A wave of relief washed over Walter's face. Amber's smile was triumphant. Richard Peaton gathered the documents, tapping them into a neat pile. "Excellent. Well, that concludes our business here." "Not quite," Patricia Chen said, speaking for the first time. Her voice cut through the smug atmosphere like a shard of glass. She opened her briefcase and took out a single, slim folder. She slid it across the table to me. "Walter," I said, my voice suddenly clear and strong, all trace of the frail, defeated woman gone. "I have signed your agreement. Now, it's only fair that you be made aware of a recent change to mine." I opened the folder. It was the Morrison Family Legacy Preservation Addendum. "What is this?" Walter asked, frowning. "This," I said, looking him directly in the eye for the first time that day, "is an addendum to the family trust. As primary trustee, I enacted it last week. It has already been filed with the court and is legally binding. Patricia, would you care to explain?" Patricia leaned forward slightly. "Certainly. The addendum states that any beneficiary found to have engaged in malfeasance or actions detrimental to the family estate, including adultery, will be immediately and irrevocably disinherited from the trust and all assets contained within." The color drained from Walter's face. Richard Peaton snatched the paper and began to read, his eyes widening in disbelief. "You can't do that," Walter stammered. "Oh, but I can," I said calmly. "My grandfather gave me that right. The house, the vacation properties, the investment portfolio, they are all assets of the trust. According to the terms of your own divorce agreement, which I just signed, our assets are to be divided as stipulated. The trust assets, however, are now solely mine." Amber stared at me, her mask of sweetness shattering to reveal the raw, ugly fury beneath. You bitch!" she hissed. I simply smiled. "The divorce is final. You've gotten what you wanted, Walter. You have your freedom. You have Amber. You have your salary and your personal savings. But you do not have my family's home. You do not have its legacy. That, you see, was never yours to take. The trap had sprung, and they were caught in it, right in the heart of their own victory celebration. A week later, they came to the house. I knew they would. They were not the type to accept defeat gracefully. They pulled into the long gravel driveway in Walter's sedan, the engine cutting out with an aggressive silence. I watched them from the living room window as they marched up the stone path to the front door. They weren't there to pack. They were there to fight. Nathan and Sage were with me. We were waiting for them. The three of us were a silent, united front in the sun-drenched foyer. When the doorbell rang, Nathan opened it. Walter and Amber pushed past him without an invitation. Walter's face was blotchy with rage. Amber's was a tight, furious knot. "What is the meaning of this, Eleanor?" Walter boomed, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged hall. "Richard has been on the phone all week. You can't just steal my inheritance." "It was never your inheritance, Walter. It was a privilege, one you were granted by my grandfather, and one you have now forfeited by your own actions." "This is because of her, isn't it?" Amber spat, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You're just a bitter old woman who can't stand to see him happy." "Happy?" I asked, a genuine curiosity in my voice. "Is that what you call this? Scheming to throw a woman out of her home for 40 years? Is this the happiness you planned for?" "You have no proof of anything," Walter insisted, his voice losing some of its bluster. "It's my word against yours." "Actually," Nathan said, stepping forward. He was holding a tablet. He turned the screen towards Walter. It displayed the spreadsheet they had made, the one titled Financial Projections. I saw Walter flinch as he recognized it. "And then there's this," Nathan continued, swiping the screen. "A copy of the $10 million life insurance policy on Walter filled the display." "Amber, I have to say, that's some serious forward thinking. Did you have a similar policy for your Aunt Eleanor before her sudden passing?"
The color drained from Amber's face. She looked, for the first time, truly terrified. Her eyes darted towards the door, like a cornered animal seeking an escape route. "You're bluffing," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Are we?" I asked softly. I walked over to the grand piano in the corner of the room, a beautiful instrument that had been my mother's. I ran my hand over the polished wood. This piano, my mother played it every single day. This house, it's not just wood and stone, Walter. It's memories, it's Christmases and scraped knees. It's the place we brought our son home from the hospital. You were willing to trade all of that for what? For her flattery? For the thrill of feeling young again? I turned back to face him. He couldn't meet my eyes. He was looking at the floor, a broken man. "You wanted a divorce, and you got one," I said. "I have signed the papers. You are free. Now I need you to leave my home." "You will be hearing from my lawyer," Amber shrieked, her composure completely gone. "I will sue you for everything you have, for slander, for—" Her tirade was cut short by a firm knock at the door. We all froze. Nathan, knowing who it was, walked over and opened it. A man in a trench coat stood on the doorstep, flanked by a uniformed officer. He held up a badge. "Good afternoon. I'm Detective Martinez, Major Crimes Division. I'm looking for Miss Amber Collins and Mr. Walter Morrison. We have a few questions for you regarding insurance fraud and the circumstances surrounding the death of Eleanor Vance." The final, beautiful, terrible curtain had fallen. Amber let out a small, strangled gasp. Walter looked like he had been turned to stone. They hadn't just lost a house, they had lost their future. As Detective Martinez stepped inside, I felt a quiet sense of finality. Justice, it turned out, was a patient guest, but it always arrived eventually. In the months that followed, a quiet but profound transformation took place. The storm had passed, leaving behind a wreckage that needed to be cleared. The house, which had briefly felt like a battleground, slowly began to feel like a sanctuary again. The legal fallout was swift and brutal for Walter and Amber. Faced with a mountain of evidence and the testimony of a now cooperative financial advisor, Walter crumbled. In exchange for a lighter sentence, he agreed to testify against Amber, detailing her manipulation, her financial schemes, and his own willing participation. He was charged with accessory to fraud, lost his job, and his reputation was left in tatters. Amber's fate was far more severe. The investigation into her aunt's death was reopened. Combined with the blatant insurance fraud, she was facing a raft of felony charges that would likely keep her behind bars for a very long time. The smug, confident woman who had tried to ruin my life was now just another frightened face in a mugshot. I found I took no joy in their destruction. There was only a quiet, somber relief, like the feeling after a dangerous fever has broken. My victory wasn't about their punishment, it was about my survival and the preservation of what was truly important. One of the loose ends was the downtown condo, the gilded cage Walter had tried to palm me off with. It was legally mine, under the divorce settlement. My first instinct was to sell it, to erase every trace of that painful chapter. But then an idea began to form. I thought of all the women like me, blindsided in their later years, left financially and emotionally adrift by husbands who had moved on. I thought of the terror and confusion, the feeling of being utterly alone. I called Patricia Chen. I said, "Patricia, I have an idea for the condo." 6 months later, we had a small, informal opening ceremony. We had turned the 2-bedroom condo into the Dawn Center. It wasn't a shelter, but a resource hub, a place where women facing a sudden divorce could come for free legal advice from a network of lawyers Patricia had assembled, get financial counseling from a retired accountant friend of mine, or simply have a cup of coffee and talk to someone who understood. It was a small operation, funded by a portion of the trust's income, but it felt more meaningful than any stock portfolio. It was taking the ugliest part of my story and turning it into a source of light for others. My life found a new rhythm. Nathan and Sage were a constant presence. Their relationship, born from a shared crisis, had blossomed into a deep and gentle love. They were rebuilding their lives together, their bond forged in honesty and mutual respect. Sage's quiet strength was the perfect anchor for Nathan's earnest heart. I reconnected with old friends, the true ones, and made new ones through my work at the center. My friendship with Victoria was over, a necessary casualty of the war. I had learned a hard lesson about trust, but I refused to let it make me bitter. I simply chose more carefully. The garden began to thrive again under my care. As I pruned the roses and pulled the weeds, I felt like I was doing the same for my own soul. I was cutting away the dead parts, nurturing the new growth, and making space for the sun to come in. The house was no longer just a legacy to be protected. It was my home again, filled not just with ghosts of betrayal, but with the promise of a new dawn. Exactly 1 year after that terrible anniversary party, we gathered in the garden again. This time, it wasn't for a celebration of a lie, but for a quiet Thanksgiving dinner. The air was crisp with the scent of autumn, and the old oak tree dropped golden leaves onto the patio. The table was smaller than it had been a year ago, but it was infinitely fuller. Nathan and Sage sat across from me, their hands intertwined. My dear friend Martha from next door was there with her husband. Victoria Chen and her wife, who had become close friends, were laughing about something with Nathan. A few other women I had met through the Dawn Center, women who were also finding their footing again, rounded out our small, eclectic family. There was an easy warmth around the table, a sense of shared history and genuine affection that had been so painfully absent the year before. Just as we were about to serve dessert, a familiar car pulled into the driveway. It was Detective Martinez. He had called ahead saying he had one final update for me. I invited him to join us for a slice of pumpkin pie.
He sat down, accepting a plate from Nathan. "I don't mean to interrupt your holiday," he began, "but I thought you'd want to know the DA finalized the plea bargain this morning. Amber pled guilty to insurance fraud, wire fraud, and a lesser charge of manslaughter in the death of Eleanor Vance. With Walter's testimony, they had her cornered. She'll be gone for a very, very long time." A quiet fell over the table. It wasn't a cheer or a celebration. It was a collective, silent exhale. The final chapter was closed. Justice had been done. "And Walter?" I asked softly.
He received 5 years probation for his role, Martinez said. He lost everything. His job, his savings, his son. I think in many ways, he's already serving a life sentence. I nodded slowly. I felt a pang of something, not pity exactly, but a deep, sorrowful ache for the 42 years that had ended in such ruin. What a waste. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I stood on the patio, looking out at the dark silhouette of the garden. I thought about the woman I was a year ago, a woman who had nearly been erased, who had thought her life was over. They had called me old and boring. They had seen me as an obstacle to be removed. They never bothered to look deeper, to see the woman who had managed a complex family trust, who had raised a good man, who had the strength of her grandfather flowing through her veins. Their greatest mistake was underestimating me. And my greatest discovery was realizing they were right about one thing, that old life was over. And I was profoundly grateful for it. The betrayal, as devastating as it was, had been a crucible. It had burned away the illusions, the comfortable routines, the person I thought I was supposed to be. And from those ashes, it had forged someone new, someone stronger. Someone who understood that a legacy isn't about what you keep, but what you build. It's not about protecting old walls, but about opening new doors. I had lost a husband, but I had found myself. And in the end, it was the best trade I ever made. Thank you for listening to my story. It's not an easy one to tell, but I believe in the power of sharing our truths. Has anything like this ever happened to you? Have you ever felt that your sacrifices were taken for granted or discovered a strength you never knew you had? Please share your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below. You are not alone.